I saw this vehicle with several metal arms and sensor-like devices mounted along both sides near the rear wheels. I have never seen anything like this on a regular car before. Does anyone know what this equipment is used for? What you saw is a vehicle-mounted road marking retroreflectometer. In simpler terms, it is a road survey system that checks how well lane lines, arrows, and crosswalk markings reflect car headlights at night. That matters because worn-out markings can almost disappear in darkness, rain, or headlight glare. As the vehicle drives at normal traffic speed, the side-mounted sensors shine light onto the road and measure how much of it reflects back. A computer inside the car records those readings and maps where the markings are still bright enough and where they need work. Road agencies use this data to decide which lines should be repainted or replaced. I found this heavy metal tool while going through some old items in my grandfather's workshop. It has a black handle, a small collet or chuck on one end, and an adjustable numbered gauge on the other. What you found is the handpiece, also called an indexing head, from a gemstone fasting machine, likely made by Lee lapidaries. It was used to hold a stone at a precise angle while a gem cutter ground and polished flat faces, called facets, onto it. The stone was first glued to a small metal rod called a dap. That rod locked into the collet at the end of the handpiece. The numbered wheel let the cutter turn the stone to exact positions, one facet at a time. Tools like this were used in lapidary workshops and by hobby gem cutters in the mid-20th century. I found this heavy rusted metal box in an old shed. It has a vented lid, a dial or knob on the side, and 4 round bulb-like parts inside with old cloth-covered wiring. It looks electrical, but I have no idea what it was used for. What you found is an old power supply for theater or projection lamps. The round glass bulbs are Tungar rectifier bulbs, an early electrical device used to turn regular alternating current from the power line into direct current, which some older lamp systems needed. Tungar rectifiers were developed by General Electric in the early 20th century and were used before modern solid-state electronics replaced them. The bulbs were filled with argon gas, not built like ordinary vacuum tubes. Since this unit worked with high voltage and the bulbs are old, it should not be plugged in or taken apart without an electrical specialist. Dear viewers, if you enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you. I found these glass display vials in my parents' garage. They were apparently left by the previous owner, who was a chemist. The labels say thiodao and lime sulfur solution, and both mention Dow Chemical Company. What are these exactly and what were they used for? What you found are vintage Dow Chemical display samples, probably from the 1950s or 1960s. The label "for display only" shows that these capsules were made for demonstration, so a sales representative, agricultural instructor, or farm advisor could show the product safely. The yellow sample labeled thiodao was a Dow fungicide. Dow filed the thiodao trademark in 1950. The darker sample is lime sulfur solution, a calcium polysulfide spray used on fruit trees, grapes, roses, and other plants to control mildew, mites, scale insects, and several crop diseases. Sealed glass capsules like these let people see the color and consistency of the chemicals without opening a container or handling the pesticide itself. I saw this large white barrel-shaped attachment mounted on the passenger side window of an old Volkswagen wagon. It is labeled Airhead, and the front has a mesh-covered opening facing into the wind, almost like an intake. Does anyone know what this was used for? What you saw is a window-mounted automotive evaporative cooler, commonly called a car swamp cooler. It was a simple cooling accessory used before built-in air conditioning became standard in most cars. The unit clamped to the passenger side window, and the screened front opening faced into the wind. To use it, the driver filled the cooler's reservoir with water. As the car moved, warm outside air rushed through the front opening and across a wet, absorbent pad. The water evaporated, cooling the air before it entered the cabin. The front mesh helped keep leaves, insects, and road debris out of the unit. These coolers worked best in hot, dry places, especially in the American Southwest. They were popular from the 1930s through the 1950s, with well-known versions sold by Thermador, Firestone, and Sears Allstate. I found this odd structure in a remote area with water-filled basins, metal panels, and what looks like a gutter or catchment system above it. There was a sign nearby, but it was badly worn, and the only word I could make out was wildlife. What you found is a wildlife guzzler, a man-made water collection system built to provide drinking water for animals during dry periods. It collects rainwater or melting snow from the metal catchment surface above, then the water runs down into a storage tank or basin below. The covered sections help reduce evaporation, which is especially important in dry desert areas. Animals reach the water through the open trough or a sloped access point. Wildlife agencies and conservation groups have used guzzlers for decades in the American West to support deer, bighorn sheep, birds, and other animals when natural water sources dry up. I found this strange old machine abandoned in the woods. It has a built-in keyboard, a dark screen or display area, and the words "Bear Computer" on the front. Does anyone know what this is? What you found is a vintage Bear engine and emissions analyzer, not a home computer. It was used in auto repair shops to check the condition of an engine and measure exhaust emissions. Mechanics connected it to a vehicle with cables and exhaust probes, then used the readings to diagnose ignition trouble, fuel mixture problems, ignition timing, and emission levels. Bear Manufacturing was founded in Rock Island, Illinois in 1917 and became known for wheel alignment and automotive diagnostic equipment. The yellow Happy Bear logo marked Bear Service Shops. This analyzer is mainly from the 1980s when emissions testing became common in auto repair. I saw this large, round-looking attachment mounted on the back of a roadwork truck. It has yellow panels, curved metal supports, and it looks like part of it may be damaged. Does anyone know what this equipment is used for? What you saw is a Scorpion truck-mounted attenuator, a mobile crash cushion attached to the back of a roadwork vehicle. It is designed to protect roadside workers and equipment if a vehicle crashes into the truck from behind. The curved frame and yellow impact sections are made to bend, collapse, and absorb crash energy in stages, reducing the force that reaches the truck and the workers ahead. Devices like this are used on shadow trucks, warning vehicles, and roadwork trucks during lane closures, repairs, and slow-moving roadwork. The damaged yellow panels suggest that this one may have already taken a hit. My cousin bought this odd-looking item at an estate sale in Michigan. It is small and made mostly of wood, with two curved metal pieces on the base and an old leather strap or cuff at the top. What your cousin bought is a vintage tabletop match holder. The leather holder at the top kept wooden matches upright, so they were easy to grab. The two curved metal arms were meant to hold a rough insert for striking matches. Pieces like this were used in homes in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, usually near fireplaces, stoves, oil lamps, or smoking tables. We found this small Star Wars The Old Republic device at work. It is a plastic keychain-sized box with one button and a small digital screen. Whenever the button is pressed, a new sequence of numbers appears. What you found is a Star Wars The Old Republic security key, a small two-factor authentication token for the online role-playing game released in December 2011 by BioWare and Electronic Arts. It was used to protect a player's account during login. After entering a username and password, the player pressed the button on this device and typed in the 6-digit code shown on the screen. The code changed about every 30 seconds, so it could only be used for a short time. This physical key came with the game's collector's edition. At the time, small code-generating key fobs like this were a common way to secure online accounts. The same idea was used for banking websites, workplace systems, and other services. A coworker found this unusual knife among his late father's belongings. It has a decorative engraved blade, a curved wooden handle with metal and colored ring details, and a matching decorated sheath. The blade is about 6 inches long, and the whole knife is roughly 8 inches long. What your coworker found is a gunong, also called a puñal, a traditional dagger from the southern Philippines. It is associated with the Moro peoples of Mindanao and the Sulu archipelago, and it is a smaller relative of the Moro Crees, also known as the Kalis. The gunong was carried as a personal dagger and could be used for close-range defense. In 1915, during the American occupation of the Philippines, civilians were banned from carrying long swords. In response, the Moro people began to carry larger and more elaborate versions of the gunong, small enough to remain legal but still formidable in close combat. Over time, the dagger became more stylized, commonly featuring carved hardwood handles, metal ferrules, and intricately engraved blades like the one in your photo. I found this small plastic device among my grandma's things. It has a hollow cylindrical mouthpiece and a cover, and when you press it, metal spikes pierce a capsule-like compartment inside. It's about 3 inches long and has no markings. What you found is a capsule dry powder inhaler, a medical device used to deliver powdered medicine directly into the lungs. It was made for people with asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other breathing conditions. A small capsule filled with medicine was placed inside the chamber. When the side buttons were pressed, tiny metal spikes pierced the capsule. Then the patient breathed in through the mouthpiece and the airflow made the capsule spin, releasing the powder so it could be carried deep into the lungs. This design belongs to a family of inhalers that became important in the late 1960s when the British company Fisons introduced the Intal Spinhaler for cromolyn sodium, a preventive asthma medicine. The idea itself is even older, with powder inhaler patents going back to 1864. I found this 7-inch decorative coffee tin labeled Giusto Caffè. It has a small handle on the outside, and when the handle is turned, it moves a half-cup-shaped piece at the bottom inside the tin. Does anyone know what this was used for? What you found is a retro Giusto Caffè coffee tin with a built-in coffee dispenser, known in Italian as a dosa caffè. It was made to store ground coffee and measure out a portion without using a spoon. The small handle on the outside turns a little rotating cup inside the bottom of the tin. To use it, you would hold the tin over the filter basket of a mocha pot and turn the handle. The cup dropped a measured amount of ground coffee into the basket below. This made the process cleaner and faster, especially in Italian homes where mocha pots were used every day. I found this box of red, glass-like sticks in my late great-uncle's house. They are smooth on the inside, rough on the outside, and each piece is split lengthwise down the middle. They do not write or draw. What you found are split synthetic ruby boulets, which are unfinished synthetic ruby rods made for industrial and jewelry use. They were made by the Verneuil flame fusion process, developed by French chemist Auguste Verneuil around 1902. In this process, aluminum oxide powder with a small amount of chromium is melted in a flame, forming a red ruby crystal. The outside surface stays rough from the way the crystal was formed, while the inside looks smoother after the boule is split lengthwise. This splitting helped release pressure inside the crystal, caused as the material cooled and contracted. Material like this was cut into watch jewels, precision bearings, and small gemstones. I found this small metal tool in a pipe smoking kit. The kit came with a pipe, but the instructions are missing, and I can identify everything else except this piece. It has a flat handle and 2 small hinged arms that open and close near the top. Does anyone know what this tool was used for? What you found is a pipe reamer, a small tool used by pipe smokers to clean the inside of the pipe bowl. After many smoking sessions, a hard carbon layer builds up along the inner walls. Pipe smokers call this layer cake, and a thin amount of it is actually useful because it helps protect the wood and keeps the pipe from getting too hot. The problem starts when that layer becomes too thick. It can narrow the bowl, make it harder to pull smoke through the pipe, and even cause cracks because heat no longer spreads evenly. This reamer was used only from time to time. Its hinged metal arms opened inside the bowl and scraped away the extra carbon, leaving just enough cake to protect the pipe. I found this bronze-colored canister with dog heads on the sides. It is about 7 inches tall. When I unscrew the ball on top, the lid opens and reveals some kind of internal mechanism. The bottom also has many round holes. Does anyone know what this was used for? What you found is a decorative pipe tobacco humidor, also called a tobacco jar. It was used by pipe smokers to store loose tobacco and keep it from drying out. The lid held a small damp sponge or pad behind a perforated section, so moisture could slowly pass into the container. The holes and inner fittings were part of that humidifying system, not a drain. Tobacco jars like this were common in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, placed on desks, tables, or smoking stands. The dog heads and bronze-colored finish were decorative details, turning a simple tobacco container into an ornamental object. I found this small metal object while cleaning out my grandparents' house after they passed away. It has a long handle with a loop at the end and a textured acorn-shaped metal piece on the other side. It is not a bell, nothing moves inside, and the handle is welded to the inside of the ball. It was found in a box with a note that said India, although my grandparents never went there. What you found is a single antique Nagoli earring from India. This style was worn by Rabari women in Rajasthan and Gujarat. and similar pieces are usually dated to the late 19th or early 20th century. The long wire section passed through a pierced or stretched earlobe, while the textured silver body was the visible decorative part of the earring. Originally, there would have been two of them, worn as a matching pair of earrings. I found these two unusual pieces of cutlery at a thrift store today. They are both about the size of a standard teaspoon and appear to be made of stainless steel with no sterling silver marks that I can see. Does anyone know what they were used for? What you found is a child's eating set. The two-pronged piece is a small fork, and the flat piece is called a food pusher, or simply a pusher. It helped push peas, mashed potatoes, and small pieces of food onto a spoon or fork, so young children could eat more easily before they learned to use a knife. Sets like this were common in Britain, the Netherlands, and parts of Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They were made in silver plate, sterling silver, and later stainless steel. I found this strange metal machine while thrifting. It was in the electronics section, and at first it reminded us of either a knitting tool or some kind of typewriter. Does anyone know what this machine was used for? What you found is an HICHPB 210 manual binding machine, used for making comb-bound documents. Sheets of paper were placed into the front slot, then the handle was pulled to punch a row of rectangular holes along the edge. A plastic comb spine was placed on the metal fingers at the top, and the machine opened the comb so the punched pages could be slipped onto it. Machines like this were common in offices, schools, copy shops, and print rooms for making reports, manuals, catalogs, and presentations without sending them to a professional bindery. I found these small GuSho branded metal and plastic attachments in a thrift store bag of dip pens and nibs. They fit into a dip pen holder, but they do not seem to hold ink like normal nibs. When I press the back, a tiny metal pin comes out, and when I let go, it springs back inside. What you found are GuSho lettering pen heads for calligraphy and sign work. Paint or ink went into the small reservoir on top, then flowed through the narrow tip as the pen moved across paper or a sign surface. The spring-loaded pin was used only for cleaning, to push dried paint out of the tip after use. Different sizes made different line widths for signs, labels, and decorative lettering. I found this heavy one-piece molded plastic object that was thrown out by a hotel. It is about 3 feet wide, has two basin-like sections, and there is no drain. There is also a small hole in the stand, about 3/4 of an inch across. What you found is the molded base from a pedicure chair station, probably from a hotel spa or nail salon. The chair would have been mounted over the round section, while the square basin area held a removable foot tub. The small hole was for a post with a padded footrest, where the client could place one foot while the technician worked. Stations like this became common in salons and hotel spas in the late 20th century. I found this galvanized metal device in an old shed in Maine. It has a rope attached to one fixed ring, and another ring moves when pulled, causing the frame to expand and the chain around the bottom to tighten. What you found is an expandable chimney sweeping tool, used to scrape soot from the inside walls of a chimney or stovepipe. When closed, the frame could be lowered into the chimney. When someone pulled the rope, the frame opened inside the chimney, pressing the chain against the wall so it could scrape off soot and creosote buildup. Tools like this were used before modern chimney brushes with flexible rods became common. They were useful in older homes with wood stoves, coal stoves, or fireplaces that needed regular cleaning. I found this fairly heavy disc about 8 inches across, and I am wondering if it might be some kind of sailing tool. What you found is a Secchi disc, a simple scientific tool used to measure water clarity. The black and white pattern, the attached line, and the size all fit the smaller version used on lakes, rivers, and other freshwater sites. To use it, the disc is lowered into the water until it disappears from view. The depth at which it can no longer be seen gives a rough measure of how clear or cloudy the water is. The original Secchi disc was introduced in 1865 by Angelo Secchi, an Italian scientist who used it to study water transparency at sea. Later versions were made smaller, around 8 inches across, and the black and white design became especially common for freshwater work. I found this small metal object next to a river. It has 3 prongs, and each prong has 3 spikes on it. It looks homemade, and I cannot tell whether it was meant for fishing or if it is just a piece of trash. What you found is most likely a ritual object associated with ochosi in Lukumi or Santeria practice rather than a fishing tool. Ochosi is an orisha connected with hunting and justice, and his ritual symbols commonly include metal bows and arrows. The 3 repeated forms on your object look much more like stylized arrows or small bow and arrow units than something made for catching fish. The rough handmade appearance also fits that identification, since these ritual tools were frequently forged in simple iron forms rather than factory-made. Museum examples of ochosi tool sets include separate arrows, bow stands, and small bow and arrow pieces, which makes this object easier to place within that tradition. I found this antique spoon at my mother-in-law's house. Does anyone know what kind of spoon this is? What you found is most likely an antique baby spoon with a loop handle that made it easier to hold and control. That unusual shape provided a steadier grip during feeding and helped small children as they began learning to use a spoon on their own. Spoons like this were common in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They were made in silver plate and sterling silver, and they served as practical feeding utensils as well as keepsakes and gift pieces for babies and young children. I was at a bar in Amsterdam, and the guy sitting across from me kept flicking this small metal object that fit in the palm of his hand and made a surprisingly loud sound. Does anyone know what it is? What you saw is a Jew's harp, also known as a jaw harp, a small musical instrument with a flexible metal tongue set inside a metal frame. The player places the frame against the mouth and flicks the tongue with a finger. The mouth acts as a resonating chamber, making the sound louder and shaping its tone. This instrument is far older than it may seem. Versions of it were used across Asia, and by the 14th century it had already spread through Europe. In the 18th century, it became fashionable in some European courts, and makers continued refining the design. One American example is an 1885 mouth harp patent granted to John McMail of Louisville, Kentucky. I found this metal tag in a random box after my grandfather passed away, and I have always been curious about it. The front has a lion, a crest, and the number 55794, while the back is completely blank. What you found is most likely a Gimbel Brothers department store charge token, an early form of store credit from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The lion, shield, and number match known Gimbel Brothers tokens, and that number identified the customer's account. At the sales counter, a clerk could use it to charge purchases to that account instead of taking cash on the spot. These tokens appeared before plastic cards and became popular in major department stores during the early 20th century. Gimbel's began in 1842, opened its first large city store in Milwaukee in 1887, and expanded to Philadelphia in 1894. Small metal tokens like this were practical, easy to carry, and for their time they felt modern and prestigious. By the mid-20th century, charge plates and plastic cards gradually replaced them. I found this in my dad's garage after he passed away. It has a wooden handle and the rest of it is metal. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is an antique smoothing iron stand, sometimes called a trivet for a flat iron. A hot iron could be placed on those raised metal rails between uses, keeping the heat away from the table or ironing board. The wooden handle allowed the stand to be moved without burning a hand. Pieces like this were used in the 19th century, before electric irons, and many were made by local blacksmiths. I found this dagger in my grandma's house. It has a curved blade, a silver-colored sheath with detailed engravings, and a handle with a small red gemstone or glass inlay. Does anyone know what kind of dagger this is? What you found is a khanjar, a traditional curved dagger associated with Oman and the broader Arabian Peninsula. The shape of the blade, the decorated sheath, and the ornate handle all fit that style. Daggers like this were traditionally worn at the waist and served not only as weapons, but also as symbols of rank, identity, and prestige. The khanjar became an important part of Omani dress from the 18th century onward and remained widely used into the 20th century. Today, it is still worn for weddings, national celebrations, and other formal occasions, and it holds such an important place in Oman that it appears on the country's state emblem. I found this small metal object in an old, crumbling house. It is labeled Rally, and it has a textured roller that spins. The owner is 92 and has kept his belongings for many years, so this could be quite old. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a Rally dry shaver, a small mechanical razor introduced in the early 1950s and designed to fit in a pocket. It was made for dry shaving without soap, water, or electricity. The textured roller turned a slotted drum, and as it moved across the face, whiskers slipped into the narrow openings and were cut by a fixed blade inside. The whole unit folded into its own small case, which made it easy to carry. The Rally was patented in 1953 by Swedish engineer Jonas A. G. Malmberg and advertised as a modern travel shaver made of surgical steel. It was a clever idea in theory, although many people found that it gave an uneven shave and was not very comfortable to use. I got this large, heavy bowl as part of a PR package. It has a removable insert at the bottom with holes in it. Does anyone know what it is used for? What you got is a popcorn bowl with a built-in kernel catcher at the bottom. The perforated insert creates a lower compartment where unpopped kernels and loose hull pieces can fall while the popcorn stays on top. That makes it easier to eat without constantly picking around the hard bits. It is a simple serving design, and the same bowl can also be used for washed fruit or salad, since extra moisture can collect below the insert instead of sitting around the food. I found this tiny metal figure with triangle markings in my change dish at home. Does anyone know what it is and whether it is blessing my house or cursing it? What you found is most likely a small charm from a vintage costume earring, shaped like a stylized figure in tribal or folk-inspired dress. The triangle markings were probably decorative details meant to suggest clothing or body ornament rather than any kind of symbol for a blessing or a curse. Pieces like this were sold as inexpensive fashion jewelry, especially in the mid-20th century when African, indigenous, and other ethnic-inspired designs became popular in Western stores. So this was most likely part of an earring set, not a supernatural object. I found this strange utensil in my mom's drawer of miscellaneous kitchen tools, and she says she has no idea what it is for. What you found is a vintage cake cutter and server, sometimes called a cake comb. The slotted blade was designed for soft, airy cakes such as chiffon or angel food, where a solid server could crush the slice. Its broad shape helped lift the piece, and the comb-like openings let it cut through the cake more neatly with less sticking and less pressure. Pieces like this were sold as kitchen serving tools in the mid-20th century, and Bakelite-style handles were very common at the time. I found this old rusted machine on a ranch in southern New Mexico. It is about 3 feet tall, made of iron, and has a series of gears and what look like foot pedals. Does anyone know what it was used for? What you found is most likely the frame of an antique horse-drawn sickle bar mower, probably made by the Johnston Harvester Company. Machines like this were used to cut hay and field grass. As the mower moved forward, the ground wheel turned the gears, and that motion drove a long reciprocating cutter bar, which is now missing. What remains in your photo is the cast iron drive mechanism that once powered the blades. Johnston Harvester began in New York in the late 1860s, published mower catalogs by 1876, and became one of the major independent farm equipment makers around the turn of the 20th century. Horse-drawn sickle bar mowers became widely used in the United States after the Civil War, so this machine comes from an important period in the early mechanization of farming. I found this small blue and metal item, and I cannot figure out what it is. It is oval-shaped, and the blue piece can pass through the ring and fold back around. It measures about 3 to 4 inches long when open. What you found is most likely a wine bottle stopper from an Aligote gift set. The blue section works as a hinged grip, swinging through the oval frame so the stopper can be inserted or removed more easily, and then folded into a compact shape. Pieces like this were made as decorative bar accessories, combining a simple practical function with a more stylish presentation for the table. I found this small white squeeze bulb attached to a glass tube with a lip. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a small facial cupping tool used for vacuum massage. The soft bulb is squeezed to create light suction, and the glass cup is then moved across the skin with oil or serum. Tools like this are made for delicate areas of the face where the suction needs to stay gentle and controlled. Cupping has been used for centuries in traditional medicine in different parts of the world, including China and the Middle East. This small version is a modern beauty tool based on that older practice, adapted for the face where the pressure needs to be much gentler than on the rest of the body. I saw a suitcase filled with chargers all connected to a laptop. Does anyone know what this setup is for? What you saw is a charging case for athlete tracking devices, the kind used in professional sports. Each small unit is worn by a player, usually inside a vest, and records movement using GPS and built-in motion sensors. Coaches then connect the devices to a laptop to download the data and review things like speed, distance covered, workload, and movement patterns that may point to fatigue or injury risk. Systems like this became widely used in elite sports during the 2000s and 2010s, as teams began relying more heavily on performance analytics. So that suitcase is essentially a portable data station for training and match analysis. I found this metal tube that's about 4 inches long, with what looks like a plastic eyepiece on one end. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a vintage selenium photographic exposure meter, also called a light meter. Before cameras had built-in metering, photographers used devices like this from the 1930s through the 1960s to judge the light and choose the right exposure settings. The eyepiece was used to aim the meter toward the subject, or light source, while the selenium cell inside produced a tiny electrical current when light struck it. That current moved the scale and gave the photographer a reading. In the film era, a tool like this could mean the difference between a clear, properly exposed photograph and a frame that came out too dark or too bright. Selenium cells gradually weakened with age and light exposure, so people usually kept the meter covered or stored in a case when it was not in use. My friend works at a nursing home, and one of the residents has had this life-size doll named Rufus with her for years. She says it has been passed down through her family for generations, and she always asks people to greet it. But when my friend asked where Rufus originally came from, the woman suddenly became completely unresponsive for the rest of the day. Does anyone recognize what this doll might be or where something like it came from? What you saw was most likely not a toy in the usual sense, but a full-size decorative terracotta figure. Based on its pose, painted surface, and overall style, it closely resembles pieces made by the Goldscheider workshop in Vienna in the late 19th century and around 1900. The company founded by Friedrich Goldscheider became well known for producing painted ceramic figures like this, including seated child figures made for display inside the home. Figures like this were created as interior decorations, meant to sit in a room and attract attention rather than be used as playthings. Goldscheider produced thousands of ceramic models and became famous for colorful terracotta sculptures in the styles that were popular at the time. I found 6 of these small green rubber pieces in my cat toy where the catnip is supposed to go. They're about the size of Cheerios, shaped like little donuts, very lightweight, and they do not stretch much. Does anyone know what they are? What you found is a set of elastration rings, small heavy-duty rubber bands used in livestock care. They are applied with a special tool called an elastrator and are used for procedures such as castration or tail docking, especially on lambs, kids, and sometimes calves. The ring is stretched open, placed in position, and then released so it tightens and cuts off blood flow to that part of the body. This method became widely used in modern farm practice because it was simple, inexpensive, and did not require surgery. So despite their small size, these little green rings were made for a very specific farm job, not for a pet toy at all. I took this photo on a cold winter day in Dalarna, Sweden, and captured a strange effect in the sky with multiple bright spots and rainbow-like arcs around the sun. Does anyone know what this atmospheric phenomenon is? What you saw is a sundog, also known as a perihelion or mock sun, one of the most striking ice halo phenomena in the winter sky. It appears when sunlight passes through countless tiny hexagonal ice crystals high in the atmosphere. Those crystals bend the light like miniature prisms and create bright spots that look like additional suns on either side of the real sun, usually when the sun is low and the air is very cold. In your photo, the display also includes a halo, a vertical sun pillar, and a bright horizontal band known as the parhelic circle. Aristotle described similar displays in the ancient world, and one of the most famous examples came in 1461, when a brilliant halo over England during the Battle of Mortimer's Cross was seen as a sign from heaven. Even today, a sky like this can make people stop and stare, because it looks less like ordinary weather and more like something almost unreal. I found this old wooden object made from dense wood. It has carvings on all sides, 3 uneven holes drilled from top to bottom, and signs of heavy use that may have been polished smooth over time, with what looks like an old repair as well. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is most likely a bijni, a traditional wooden seed sower from India and nearby parts of South Asia. The cup at the top held the seed, and the drilled channels allowed it to fall into the soil in several lines at once. Similar carved examples from eastern India date to the late 19th or early 20th century, and archive photographs show wooden seed drills of this general type still being carried in India around 1928 to 1930. Its design comes from a much older farming tradition. Sources on Indian agriculture note that drill sowing had already been an established practice for centuries, and by the early 17th century, writers were describing seed being fed into the ground through tubes attached to a plow. I've noticed these cylinder-shaped units on the roofs of a few older homes. They're connected to what look like gas lines or copper pipes, and only a handful of houses nearby have them. What are these, and what were they used for? What you saw is an older-style rooftop solar water heater, a system designed to use sunlight to heat water for the house. The large cylinder is the insulated storage tank, and the panels or tubes beneath it collect solar heat. As the water or heat transfer fluid warms up, it rises naturally into the tank above through a process called thermosiphon flow. The heated water then stays in the tank until someone in the house needs it. Many systems like this also had a backup gas or electric heater for cloudy days. These units became especially popular in sunny parts of the American Southwest because they helped lower utility bills. Solar water heating first appeared in the United States in the late 19th century and became fairly common in warm regions by the 1920s. Interest in these systems grew again during the energy crises of the 1970s, when solar technology was seen as a practical and economical way to heat water at home. I saw this fist-sized metal piece hanging from the front of a car. It's pointed, shaped a little like a cat or a heart. It reminds me of those pointed self-defense keychains. Does anyone know why it's there? What you saw is a tsurikawa, a ring handle modeled after the hanging straps used in Japanese trains and buses. Its story took a very different turn in the 1970s, when members of Japan's bosozoku car and motorcycle scene began removing those handles from public transit and hanging them from their bikes and cars as a small act of rebellion. Today, a tsurikawa is mostly a visual accessory rather than a functional car part. When it hangs low from the front or rear of a vehicle, it serves as a reference to Japanese street culture and to the custom scene built around lowered cars, attitude, and showmanship. Even now, that little ring still feels slightly provocative and deliberately out of place. I received this small scented cube as a gift from Morocco and at first thought it was soap. But it doesn't dissolve or soften in water, and instead gives off a strong perfume-like smell. Does anyone know what this might be? What you received is a traditional Moroccan solid perfume block, sometimes called an amber or musk cube. These small handcrafted pieces are made from a blend of natural waxes, resins, essential oils, and fragrant botanicals like rose, jasmine, and sandalwood. Unlike soap, they are not meant to dissolve in water. Instead, they slowly release their fragrance over time. They are commonly used to scent clothing, linens, and small spaces. You can also gently rub the surface onto skin, hair, or fabric to transfer the fragrance. In Morocco and across North Africa, these perfume blocks have been used for generations as a simple and long-lasting way to wear and enjoy fragrance. My grandmother was given this unusual metal object by a friend who passed away. It's small enough to fit in one hand, with a hollow cylinder and a curved pipe attached to it. We haven't tried to open it because it looks old and fragile. Does anyone know what this might be? What you found is an antique opium pipe, a device used in the 18th and 19th centuries to vaporize and inhale opium. Unlike a tobacco pipe, this type was made to work with a small lamp. A prepared pellet of opium was gently heated until it released vapor, which was then drawn through the long, hollow stem. The cylinder held the bowl assembly, while the curved pipe allowed the user to inhale the vapor. Pipes like this were part of a highly ritualized smoking practice, especially in China and later in opium dens in Chinatowns across the West. The ritual was slow and deliberate, with the pipe used together with small tools for preparing the opium and a lamp that supplied the heat. I found this at a local thrift store. It is about the size of a standard ottoman, but it has a strange padded extension and an extra leg. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a shoe-fitting stool, the kind once used in shoe stores. A salesperson would sit on the main padded seat while helping a customer try on shoes, fasten buckles, or tie laces. The lower padded extension gave the customer a place to rest one foot, making it easier to put on the shoe without bending awkwardly. The extra leg supported that side and kept the stool steady during use. Stools like this were especially common in shoe shops in the early and mid-20th century when shoe fitting was a more personal, hands-on service. Instead of simply taking a box from a shelf, store staff usually measured the foot, brought out several pairs, and helped the customer find the best fit. This looks like some kind of single handheld listening device, almost like a one-sided headphone. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a mono DJ headphone made for one-ear monitoring, and it appears to be an IMG Stageline MDH6300. Devices like this let DJs listen privately to the next track, while the current one is still playing through the speakers. Instead of covering both ears, the DJ keeps one ear free to hear the room and the live mix, while the single ear cup carries the cue track. This one-ear design became popular in club and radio work because it made beat matching and track changes easier. Many DJs now use regular headphones and simply leave one ear uncovered, but mono headphones like this were created specifically for that purpose. I found this small stainless steel tweezer-like tool in a junk drawer. I tried Google Lens and could not find this exact item. Does anyone know what it is used for? What you found is a nose pad tool for eyeglasses. It is used to remove and install snap and nose pads, the kind that fit into the frame without tiny screws. The forked end helps push the old pad out, while the curved end helps place a new one into position. Small tools like this became more common as eyeglass repair kits grew more specialized during the 20th century. I found these lightweight ceramic pieces with lots of holes and pointed prongs inside on both sides. There also seemed to be mounting holes in the back. Does anyone know what they were used for? What you found is a ceramic radiant insert from an early gas heater, probably dating to the 1920s or early 1930s. Pieces like this were placed inside gas heaters, where the flame heated the ceramic until it became extremely hot and began giving off radiant heat. The many openings let heat move through the unit, while the ridges increased the heated surface area. These inserts came from a time when many homes used separate gas heaters instead of central heating. Once the ceramic was heated, it held that warmth and released it gradually into the room, making the heater both more effective and more comfortable to sit near. I found this small wooden item in an office I clean on weekends, and there was no one there to ask. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a wooden wire cheese slicer, a simple kitchen tool used to cut clean slices from softer cheeses. The thin wire stretches between the two posts, and the small screw keeps the wire tight. To use it, the wire is pulled down through the cheese, which gives a smoother cut than a knife and helps make the slices more even. Tools like this became common in the 20th century, especially in home kitchens and small shops because they worked well on cheeses that tended to stick to a regular blade or crumble while being cut. I spotted this S-shaped metal piece on the front of an old house while out on a walk, and I have noticed similar ones on other buildings too. Does anyone know what it is? What you saw is an anchor plate, also known as a wall anchor. It is the visible end of an iron tie rod built into the structure of the house. That rod runs through the masonry and helps hold the walls together, reducing the risk of bowing, spreading, or cracking as the building gets older. These plates became especially common on older brick buildings in Europe and North America, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries. Because they were visible on the facade, builders sometimes gave them decorative shapes such as stars, crosses, or scrolling S-forms. The idea behind tie rods is much older and goes back to Roman and medieval construction, where they were used to resist outward pressure in masonry structures. I found this green plastic container on a beach on the southeastern coast of Sweden. Inside were 2 plastic capsules filled with liquid and wrapped in gauze. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is an IPP-51M individual anti-chemical decontamination kit, a Cold War-era military item once issued to the armed forces of the Polish People's Republic. It was carried with a gas mask and intended for emergency use after contact with chemical agents. Inside were gauze pads, several sealed containers filled with decontaminating liquids, and small ampules meant to provide quick relief after exposure. The gauze wrapping helped the user handle and apply the chemicals without direct skin contact. This type of kit was standard issue from the early 1970s until about the mid-1990s, when it was replaced by a newer version. It was a compact field kit, designed to help a soldier quickly wipe down exposed skin, gear, or nearby surfaces before contamination could spread further. This beach find is a small piece of Warsaw Pact history. Dear viewers, if you enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you. I found this large metal object on my table after a house party. It looks like some kind of expensive machine part, and it is about the size of a flower vase. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is the cold head from a cryo cooler, which is essentially a cryogenic refrigerator built to reach extremely low temperatures. It looks very similar to Sumitomo SHI 2-stage Gifford McMahon units from the RDK and RDC series. These systems connect to a helium compressor and are used in MRI machines, superconducting magnets, laboratory cryostats, accelerators, and other research equipment. The heavy stainless steel body and the long internal stem are part of the assembly that pulls heat out of the chamber. In simple terms, this is the part of the machine that keeps scientific or medical equipment cold enough to work under very specialized conditions. I saw this striking pink lake from a plane while flying over West Africa on a route from Istanbul to Senegal. It looked bright red from above. Does anyone know what lake this is? What you saw is Lake Retba, better known as Lac Rose, near Dakar in Senegal. Its pink to reddish color comes from salt-loving algae called Dunaliella salina that thrive in the lake's highly saline water. The color becomes strongest during the dry season, when evaporation increases the salt concentration. Lake Retba is known not only for its unusual color, but also for its long tradition of salt harvesting. Local workers still collect salt there by hand, which makes the lake both a natural landmark and a place of daily work. I found this staked in my bean field on private property about 100 yards from the road, near the interstate right-of-way. It measures about 2 feet by 2 feet and looks like some kind of photo reference marker. Could it be for drones, satellites, or something else? What you found is a ground control point used for drone mapping and survey work. The black and white pattern is designed to stand out clearly in aerial photos, and the number helps identify that specific marker during processing. Survey crews place targets like this on the ground, measure their exact position with GPS equipment, and then use them to match drone images to real-world coordinates. That makes the final map much more accurate for distance, elevation, and boundaries. The idea comes from photogrammetry, which was already being used from aircraft long before drones became common. Today, the same method is used for road projects, drainage studies, construction planning, utility work, and agricultural surveys. Since this one was near an interstate right-of-way, it was probably part of a professional mapping project connected to nearby land or infrastructure. I found this clear, solid object and cannot figure out what it was used for. One side is rounded, the other is flat, and there is a tab at one end with gold stripes and a BGL logo. It seems to be made of acrylic or a similar material. What you found is a vintage Bausch & Lomb Magnabar, a solid acrylic magnifier made for reading fine print and looking over maps, charts, and technical drawings. Instead of a round lens, it uses a long, curved surface that enlarges a strip of text at a time, which made it especially useful on desks and drafting tables. Bausch & Lomb was founded in Rochester, New York in 1853 and became one of the best-known American makers of precision optical equipment. I found this small metal kit with several brushes and tool attachments in the toolbox of a World War II veteran who loved woodworking. Does anyone know what it was used for? What you found is a vintage smoker's companion built around a brass Vesta case, a pocket holder made to carry matches safely. The case belongs to the period when friction matches became widely used, and sets like this were especially popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The small metal pieces were used for pipe care, including tamping tobacco and cleaning the bowl or stem. The fleur-de-lis on the front is a historic emblem associated with France, which gave the piece a more distinctive look. I found this unusual wooden chair at a sale today, and I cannot figure out what it was meant for. What you found is a Victorian gout stool, a small folding footrest made to support a swollen leg or foot. It was used by people suffering from gout, a painful condition that affected the joints. The padded top gave the leg a softer place to rest, and the crossed wooden frame kept it low and steady beside a chair or bed. Items like this became popular in the 19th century, especially in Britain, where gout was strongly associated with wealth, age, and a rich diet. Furniture makers produced special household pieces for invalid care at home, and this is one of them. I bought a lamp at a secondhand store, and the bulb that came with it has a strange black covering around the center. It barely gives off any light. Does anyone know what kind of bulb this is? What you bought is a flickering flame effect neon bulb, a decorative bulb made to imitate the warm, restless glow of a candle. It does not work like a normal incandescent bulb with a heated filament. Inside, it uses a low-pressure gas discharge system, and the dark plates in the center are the electrodes. When voltage is applied, the gas glows around the cathode instead of producing a strong white light, which is why the bulb appears dim and creates more atmosphere than illumination. The most interesting part is the flicker itself. In this type of bulb, the glow is deliberately unstable, so it lights only part of the electrode at one moment and then shifts in a random, flame-like pattern. A patent from the 1960s described this as a moving cathode glow that imitates a candle flame. Neon glow lamps date back to the late 19-teens, and decorative versions like this later became popular in accent lamps, night lights, and holiday displays. I found a light brown wooden object with a smooth handle on one end and a rough bulb-shaped end on the other. It's fairly heavy. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is most likely a handmade shillelagh made from a tree burl. A burl is a rounded growth that forms when a tree is damaged or stressed, and the wood inside becomes especially dense and knotted. That is what gives this piece its heavy, solid head and its unusual shape. Someone appears to have kept that natural wooden mass at one end and smoothed the rest into a handle. That shape fits the shillelagh, a traditional Irish walking stick known for its thick, heavy top. It could serve as a cane, but it was also sturdy enough to be used as a club. Classic shillelaghs were usually made from blackthorn, while this one looks more like a homemade version shaped from a natural burl. My dad found this item, and I have no idea what it is. What your dad found is a charger for removable cell phone batteries. Before most phones switched to sealed batteries and USB charging, devices like this were used to charge a spare battery outside the phone. The clear top piece holds the battery in place, and the metal contacts can be adjusted to line up with the battery terminals. Then the whole unit plugs directly into a wall outlet. Chargers like this became common in the late 1990s and the 2000s, when many phones still used replaceable batteries and people kept a second one charged as a backup. I found this small tool in an old toolbox. It is about 6.5 inches long, with a plastic handle and metal ends, one pointed and one shaped like a small blade. The owner of the toolbox used to work on cars, though I am not sure this is related. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a carpet installer's row finder and kicker pick tool, a small hand tool used when wall-to-wall carpet was being fitted and stretched into place. The pointed end was used to part the carpet pile and follow a single row before cutting, which helped create a cleaner seam. The forked end was used to clear debris from the teeth of a carpet kicker, the tool that gripped the carpet and helped stretch it tight across the floor. Tools like this became common in the 20th century, when wall-to-wall carpeting was used in more and more homes and commercial spaces. I found this copper tube, about 3 inches long, while mowing the lawn. It has flared ends, a glass bead inside, and what looks like a spring. I probably hit it with the mower, which seems to be why it is torn open. From the way it looks, the bead may have sealed one end of the tube under spring pressure. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is the end piece of a jiggle siphon, also known as a shaker siphon or jiggler. It was designed to start siphoning gasoline, water, or other liquids without mouth suction or electricity. Inside the copper tip, the glass bead and spring work as a simple one-way valve. When the tube is moved up and down in liquid, the bead lifts and lets fluid enter. When it drops back into place, it seals the opening and stops the liquid from flowing backward. After a few shakes, gravity takes over and the siphon continues working on its own. This same principle was later described in U.S. Patent number 4414997. I keep seeing these old metal poles around Fresno, California, and there are at least 15 of them scattered across the city. They look like they might be some kind of siren, possibly from decades ago. However, I have never been able to figure out what they were used for. What you found is one of Fresno's old civil defense air raid sirens, most likely a Federal Signal SD-10. It was part of a Cold War warning network created to alert the city in the event of an air raid or another major emergency. The SD-10 was a dual-tone electromechanical siren made by Federal Signal, rated at 10 horsepower and about 109 decibels at 100 feet, so it was built to carry its sound across a wide area. Local Fresno history accounts say the city installed 27 of these sirens in June 1956, and the system finally went silent in 1977. About 15 are still standing around town today. They are remnants of a time when cities across America were building warning systems for a possible attack from the sky. In Fresno, they outlasted the Cold War plans they were built for and now remain as tall pieces of forgotten emergency infrastructure. I have no idea what this item is. Does anyone know what it might be? I am also wondering whether it has any value or if it would be better to donate it. What you found is a Chinese-style opium pipe. Its shape comes from the traditional opium pipes used in China, where opium was heated over a special lamp so it vaporized instead of burning. Museum examples from the Qing and Republican periods show the same basic design: a long stem, a raised bowl, and a fitted saddle that held the bowl above the body of the pipe. The history behind it is much larger than the object itself. Opium smoking spread widely in China during the 17th century, and by 1729 the Qing government had already banned its sale and use. Another ban followed in 1796, yet the trade continued to grow and eventually helped lead to the Opium Wars of 1839 to 1842 and 1856 to 1860. Your piece keeps the classic long curved silhouette, but the dragon head, pagoda scenes, and heavy ornamentation make it look more like a decorative display piece or an export souvenir than a simple working pipe. I came across this massive structure on the shore of Lake Superior in Marquette, Michigan, and it looks abandoned. Does anyone know what it was used for? What you found is the Lower Harbor Ore Dock in Marquette, an abandoned loading structure built in 1931 and 1932 for the Duluth, South Shore, and Atlantic Railroad. It was designed to move iron ore from rail cars into Great Lakes freighters as quickly as possible. Trains ran along the top and dumped the ore into 150-tall storage pockets. When a ship pulled alongside, workers opened the gates below, and the ore dropped through steel chutes straight into the cargo holds by gravity. This concrete dock rises about 85 feet above the water and stretches nearly 1,000 feet in length, showing just how large the iron trade on Lake Superior had become. The dock was taken out of service in 1971, while Marquette's Upper Harbor Dock stayed active. So today this one remains as a massive industrial relic from the era that supplied America's steel mills. I found this on an old dead-end railroad track and could not figure out what it was for. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a railroad derail, a safety device made to stop unauthorized or runaway rail cars from rolling onto an active track. It clamps onto the rail and forces the wheel off the track if a car moves past it. That may sound destructive, but it is far safer to throw a car off the rail at low speed than to let it roll into a train, a crossing, or a work area. Derails were widely used on sidings, spurs, industrial tracks, and dead-end lines, especially in the late 19th and 20th centuries when unattended freight cars posed a real danger. Its whole purpose was simple: sacrifice one rail car if necessary and stop a far more dangerous collision. My great-grandmother brought this back from an African safari in the 1980s, and I recently inherited it. It is about a foot tall and made of both wood and metal. My mother said it came from a cannibal tribe. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a Tokoloshe figurine, a carved image of one of the best-known creatures in southern African folklore. In Zulu, Xhosa, and related Nguni traditions, the Tokoloshe is described as a small, hairy goblin or water spirit associated with witchcraft, fear, and unexplained misfortune. According to these stories, it could be sent by a malicious person, become invisible by drinking water or swallowing a stone, and bring sickness or even death. One of the most famous beliefs said that people raised their beds on bricks because the Tokoloshe could not climb high enough to reach them. Families also turned to sangomas, traditional healers, to drive it away. Your figure was most likely carved in the 20th century as a curio or tourist piece inspired by that folklore, rather than as proof of any story about a cannibal tribe. I found this in a field, and it measures about 1.6 inches across. Does anyone know what it could be? What you found is a medieval ring brooch, also called a fibula, used to fasten clothing such as cloaks, veils, and other outer garments. Pieces like this were common in the high and late Middle Ages, roughly from the 13th through the 15th century. The pin passed through the fabric and caught against the ring, which made the brooch both practical and decorative. Many examples were made of bronze or copper alloy, and some were engraved with short inscriptions carrying romantic, religious, or protective meanings. When worn on a cloak or dress, the brooch not only held the fabric in place, but also displayed a message that others could see. I noticed a row of tall posts in a neighborhood in the Netherlands, each about 13 feet high with netting attached at the top. They were only on one side of the street, and there were at least 15 of them lined up in a row. Does anyone know what they are? What you saw is part of a bat guidance system, installed to help bats stay on course after roadside trees or hedgerows have been removed. Bats rely on long, linear features in the landscape for night navigation, using echolocation to follow edges they can recognize. When those natural guides disappear during construction or roadwork, bats can become disoriented and end up flying dangerously low over the road. To reduce that risk, road projects may include tall mesh screens like these, usually mounted on posts about 13 to 14 feet high. The mesh acts as an artificial landmark that reflects echolocation signals and guides bats along the barrier instead of into traffic. Monitoring has shown that bats really do use these structures in the way they were intended. I found this World War II photo showing American soldiers getting ready to land, and several of them are carrying large cylindrical containers strapped to their chests. What were these tubes used for? What you found in that photo is a carrying tube for a 60mm mortar round. The image shows soldiers of the 90th Infantry Division aboard LCI-326 on their way to Utah Beach on D-Day, and those tubes were there for one reason: to get mortar ammunition ashore quickly. The 60mm mortar was one of the infantry's fastest sources of close fire support, so extra rounds were sometimes distributed among regular riflemen instead of being carried only by the mortar crew. The container itself was a rugged single-round packing tube, usually made from heavy fiber material similar to a mailing tube. Its job was to protect the fuse and propelling charge from moisture, shocks, and rough handling. Wartime manuals note that 60mm mortar rounds were packed in standard fiber containers before being loaded into larger metal shipping containers. In rare and extremely desperate situations, soldiers reportedly used 60mm mortar rounds as improvised hand-thrown explosives. To do this, a soldier would remove the safety pin and strike the tail of the round against a hard surface to simulate the force of being fired from a mortar. It was considered a last-ditch measure in combat, since these rounds were designed to be fired from a mortar, not handled that way in the field. I found this cast iron hook that measures about 4 inches wide and 3.5 inches tall. One side is embossed with what looks like Patent DC or Atten DC, and the other says No Knot. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a no-knot cord, or rope hitch, patented on December 1, 1914, by George Auperley and James Waldo. It is a cast iron fastener designed to secure a rope or cord to a fixed support without tying a knot. The line was wrapped around the center post and threaded through the openings between the 3 prongs. Once pulled tight, the tension locked it in place and kept it from slipping. This gave it the same job as a knot, but made it faster to fasten and easier to release without cutting the line or stopping to untie it. I found 5 old brown tubes at Goodwill. They are made of wood or very hard cardboard, with silver-colored ends and the stamp EA Germany near the bottom. Some are marked 110 and others 100. Each one weighs about 6 ounces, stands about 14 inches tall, has a 2-inch opening at the top, and a 2.5-inch opening at the bottom. Does anyone know what they were used for? What you found is a set of textile bobbins, or yarn cones, the kind used in mills to hold thread or yarn for weaving and other machine work. Their tapered shape made them easy to mount on industrial equipment, and the metal ends helped them withstand repeated use at high speed. The EA Germany stamp shows they were made in Germany, and numbers like 100 and 110 were likely size or model markings. Before plastic cores became common, mills used sturdy wooden or heavy fiber bobbins like these for large quantities of thread. Since all 5 are empty and match each other, they may also have been sample pieces used to show a manufacturer's finished product. I found this object about 10 inches deep in a farmer's field in Switzerland. It feels surprisingly heavy for its size, and the patina makes me think it may be pretty old. What you found is the clapper from a traditional Swiss livestock bell, the part that hung inside the bell and struck the sides to make it ring. The loop at the top was used to attach it inside the bell, and the heavy body gave it enough swing to produce a strong, clear tone. In Switzerland, bells like these were used not only on cows but also on goats and sheep, helping herders locate their animals by sound in mountain pastures, in fog, and across steep ground. Livestock bells were already known in Europe by the late Middle Ages, and in Switzerland bell making later grew into a well-known Alpine craft. In Valais, a quality bell still goes through more than 25 stages of production, including the fitting of the clapper. Over time, these bells also became part of seasonal cattle drives, when decorated animals were led through villages wearing large ceremonial bells. I found this heavy enameled metal object sitting on the sidewalk, and I cannot figure out what it was used for. It has a hinged top and looks like some kind of press, although it does not seem to have been used very much. What you found is a tortilla press, a hand-operated kitchen tool used to shape corn dough into flat, round tortillas. The dough is placed between 2 flat plates, and the long handle provides the leverage needed to press it quickly and evenly by hand. Tools like this have been used for generations in Mexican and Central American cooking, where fresh tortillas were made daily from corn dough. Modern presses are commonly made of cast iron, aluminum, or enameled metal like yours, and they became especially popular in home kitchens because they made tortilla making quicker and more consistent. I bought this box at a thrift store over the weekend and cannot figure out what it was made for. It has a felt-lined interior and a label that says 1986 Royal London. What you bought is a vintage wooden chest purse made by Royal London Limited, part of a novelty handbag style that became popular in the late 1960s. These purses were designed to resemble miniature trunks or travel cases, while the felt-lined interior protected small personal items such as makeup, gloves, or jewelry. The curved padded divider inside helped keep everything from shifting while the bag was being carried. Surviving Royal London examples from the 1960s show that the company sold several wooden box purses in this style, including dated pieces from 1966 and 1968, with many marked as made in Japan. I found this small gray metal object on the ground in Dublin, Ireland. It is about 1.5 inches long and feels fairly heavy for its size. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a replica of a celestial spirit key from the anime and manga Fairy Tail, most likely one of the silver keys linked to Canis Minor, the little dog spirit Plu. In the story, Lucy Heartfilia uses keys like this to summon celestial spirits. The silver keys belong to the more common spirits, while the rare zodiac spirits are tied to gold keys, which show up much less frequently throughout Lucy's story. Fairy Tail was created by Hiro Mishima. The manga began in 2006, and the anime adaptation followed in 2009. After that, keys like this became a recognizable part of the series and were widely made as fan merchandise. I found this lever in the stairwell of an old tenement building in Edinburgh, Scotland. The building was probably built around 1905, and there is one of these levers on every floor. On the first floor, there is also a small wooden box underneath it. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is an old mechanical door release handle from an Edinburgh tenement building. In buildings like this, a visitor at the main entrance would pull the outside bell, and after hearing it, the resident could step out onto the landing and lift this handle to release the front door downstairs. The movement was carried through the walls by a hidden system of wires, pulleys, and bell cranks, which explains why there was one of these handles on every floor. The small wooden box below the first floor example likely covered part of that mechanism. Systems like this were widely used in Scottish tenements from the late 18th century through the Victorian and Edwardian periods. If this one no longer seems to do anything, the internal linkage has probably broken, seized up, or been hidden during later repairs. I found this gadget in a drawer after my roommates moved out. It has a bamboo body, a charging port on one end, and a pointed metal piece that slides out from the center. Any ideas? What you found is a rechargeable wireless meat thermometer used for grilling, roasting, and cooking in an air fryer. The pointed metal piece is the temperature probe, which slides out and is inserted into the meat, while the bamboo body serves as its charging case. Devices like this connect to a phone by Bluetooth and let the cook monitor the internal temperature without opening the oven or hovering over the grill. That makes them especially useful for steak, chicken, turkey, and other meats where precise doneness matters. Its whole purpose is to tell you exactly when the food is ready without cutting into it and letting the juices escape. I found this small metal tool in my parents' garage. It has two rods that cross in the middle, and I cannot figure out what it was used for. What you found is a mechanical pull-through knife sharpener. The blade is pulled down through the crossed rods in the center, where both sides of the edge are sharpened at the same time. That made this type of sharpener a quick and practical tool for home kitchens, because it could restore a dull knife without the slower process of using a whetstone. Commercial versions with crossed ceramic rods were already being developed in the early 1970s, and a 1975 patent describes this same basic concept in detail. The design proved so effective that modern pull-through sharpeners still rely on the same principle. Dear viewers, if you enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you. I found this in my grandpa's basement. My first thought was that it might be some kind of fencing tool, especially since his family had a dairy farm in the early 1900s. The handles are long, yet it only opens and closes a little. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a fence wire tightener, a farm tool used to crimp loose wire and tighten a fence line again. When the handles are opened, the rows of rounded pins line up so the wire can be placed between them. As the handles close, the tool forms a sharp crimp in the wire, shortening it slightly and increasing the tension without cutting it. That made it especially useful for repairing sagging field fences on farms. A very similar design appears in a wire tightener patent issued on July 13, 1937, to Henry Smith and Clyde McDonald of Akron, Ohio. Tools like this were a practical part of fence maintenance in the early and mid-20th century, especially on cattle and dairy farms. I found this while going through some drawers of old things from my dad's house after he passed away a few years ago. I took a lot of items from the house at the time, and I think this was one of them. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a brass slide bar used for playing lap steel guitar, likely an Elton model from around the 1950s. Instead of pressing the strings against the frets with the fingers, the player held this bar in the hand and glided it across the strings while the instrument lay flat. That created the smooth, singing sound associated with Hawaiian music, country steel guitar, and other slide-based styles. The weight of the brass helped produce a fuller, longer-lasting tone, while the curved shape made the bar easier to control during vibrato and long sliding notes. It may look unusual today, but it was a standard tool for creating a very recognizable guitar sound. I found this strange metal object in the dirt when I was a little kid, and I kept it because I thought it looked cool. I have tried image searching it a few times, but I still have no idea what it is. The back also says Canada Cars in capital letters. What you found is a metal slammer from the Milk Caps game that became hugely popular in the mid-1990s under the name Pogs. In that game, players stacked lightweight cardboard caps and took turns striking the pile with a heavier piece like this one. Any caps that landed face up were won by the player, which is why slammers were usually made of metal, while the playing caps themselves were made of cardboard. The marking on the back appears to connect it to Canada Caps, one of the themed versions sold during that period. The game itself goes back much further to children playing with real milk bottle caps, long before it was revived and turned into a collectible craze. I found this metal object while cleaning out the basement of a house I just bought. It is about 6¼ inches long, with a ribbed end that measures 3 inches across, and it locks into 3 different positions. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a 19th century cobbler's peg rasp, a tool used to smooth the rough ends of wooden pegs inside boots and shoes. Before stitched soles became standard, shoemakers commonly secured soles with small wooden pegs, and those pegs could leave sharp or uneven ends inside the shoe. This tool was drawn along the insole to shave those ends down and make the finished shoe more comfortable to wear. What makes this example especially unusual is its adjustable head, which could be locked into different positions, so the shoemaker could work more easily near the toe or the heel. This design is associated with Gilbert Townsend of Rochester, New York, who patented a version of the tool in 1866. The ribbed metal end served as the working surface, while the long shank allowed the tool to be held steady as the inside of the shoe was being finished. I came across these unusual dome-shaped structures somewhere between Katowice and Krakow. They have smooth, rounded forms grouped together out in a field and look like something from a science fiction movie. What you saw is Alvernia Studios, now known as Alvernia Planet, a futuristic film and event complex just west of Krakow. The domes were built in the early 2000s as the RMF Media Complex and later became Alvernia Studios, a project created by Polish media entrepreneur Stanisław Tyczyński. They were not built as decorative shells, but as real working spaces for film production, with sound stages, post-production facilities, and other high-tech studio functions. Since 2017, the site has been developed as Alvernia Planet, where that same science fiction look now serves as a setting for events, immersive attractions, and film-related experiences. I found this wooden rack filled with blocks arranged by length and width. The only marking is a warning about wood shrinkage, and the pieces look like some kind of gauge blocks. Does anyone know what this set is? What you found is a letterpress furniture cabinet from an old print shop, filled with wooden spacing blocks used to lock the type in place before it went onto the press. In traditional letterpress printing, these pieces were placed around the metal type inside the frame to fill empty spaces and keep the entire layout tight and stable during printing. They were made slightly lower than the type, so they could hold everything firmly without taking ink. The rack kept the blocks sorted by size, usually in picas, an old printer's unit equal to about 1/6 of an inch. Sets like this were a basic part of printing for centuries, back when every page had to be assembled by hand before it could be printed. I found this small vice-like tool with a wooden handle. It is about 8 inches long, has a notch cut into the jaws, and I could not find any markings on it. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a small hand vise, the kind used for fine work by jewelers, watchmakers, gunsmiths, and other repair trades. The screw tightens the jaws to hold tiny parts securely, while the notch helps grip round pieces like wire, pins, or small rods without letting them slip. The wooden handle lets the user hold the vise in one hand while filing, drilling, shaping, or polishing with the other. Tools like this were already common in precision workshops by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and the design changed very little because it worked so well for delicate handwork. I found this while hiking in Tano National Forest near Cave Creek, Arizona. It looks like it was carved into the rock. Does anyone know what it is? What you found appears to be a spiral petroglyph, an ancient design carved into the surface of the rock. Spirals and concentric circles are common in rock art across the American Southwest, including Arizona, and are usually linked to indigenous cultures that lived in the region long before European settlement. No one can say with complete certainty what a symbol like this meant, but designs of this kind have been connected to ideas about water, movement, time, and spiritual journeys. The most important thing is that this was very likely made by people, not by natural weathering, which means it may be part of a much older cultural landscape still preserved in the desert. I found this at a thrift store. It weighs about 2 pounds, measures 6 inches by 3 inches, and looks like it may have been painted gold. At first I thought it might be an old-fashioned iron, but that does not seem right. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is the lid from a small cast iron stove humidifier made in the shape of a flat iron. The perforated top was designed to let moisture rise out, while the missing lower section held the water. Set on a warm stove, it helped add humidity to a dry room, and some versions were also used with scented material to freshen the air. Pieces like this were common in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when cast iron household goods were made to be both useful and decorative. I found this small metal pot with a little inner cup that fits into the lid. It has steam holes that can be opened and closed, and the small cup has its own handle and lid. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a fondue chinois set, used at the table for cooking small pieces of meat in hot broth. The metal top with cutouts is meant to hold the fondue forks in place while the meat cooks, and that is what sets it apart from a cheese fondue pot. Cheese fondue uses an open pot, while this style keeps several forks separated around the rim during the meal. Sets like this became especially popular in Switzerland during the 20th century as part of a shared meal served right at the table. I found this unusual metal object in my grandparents' house. It has pointed ends on both sides, and both of those tips can be removed. Does anyone know what it is? What you found appears to be a vintage Gucci bamboo-style pen, likely from the 1960s. The pointed ends are removable caps, and the body was designed to resemble sections of bamboo, one of the best-known motifs associated with Gucci. Pieces like this were made as luxury writing accessories, which is why it looks more like a decorative object than an ordinary pen. I found this round metal device among my dad's belongings after he passed away. It is labeled Goodwill Driver Unit, model G25, and has a small mesh opening on one side with screw terminals on top. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a compression driver for a horn speaker. It is a specialized audio component used in public address systems, megaphones, theater sound systems, and large concert setups. Unlike a regular speaker cone, this unit has a small diaphragm hidden inside. That diaphragm creates sound and sends it through the mesh-covered opening into a horn. The horn then projects the sound much more efficiently, allowing it to travel farther and seem louder with less power. This is why compression drivers became so important in the early 20th century, especially in places where sound needed to reach a large crowd. They are mainly used for high and mid-range frequencies where clarity matters. The screw terminals on top connect the driver to an amplifier, and the threaded front attaches to the horn itself. I saw these two tall yellow columns at UK border control in France, positioned on either side of the vehicle lane. Does anyone know what they are used for? What you saw are radiation portal monitors. These tall yellow columns are passive radiation detectors used to screen vehicles as they pass through border control. They are not X-ray scanners and do not create an image of the vehicle. Instead, they detect radiation coming from inside the car, cargo, or surrounding area, which helps authorities identify hidden radioactive materials or contaminated goods. This technology was first used at secure facilities, weapons laboratories, and scrap metal yards, where a lost radioactive source could create a serious safety problem. In the late 1990s, similar systems were installed in parts of Europe and Asia to help prevent nuclear smuggling after the breakup of the Soviet Union. After the September 11th terrorist attacks in the United States, border security became much stricter, and radiation monitors became more common at borders, ports, and airports. At a crossing like this, they quietly check each vehicle for unusual radiation levels. I found this decorative-looking sphere, and I'm trying to identify it. The surface is covered with engraved lines, symbols, and markings that look almost like some kind of map or chart. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a celestial globe, a model of the sky rather than the Earth. Instead of showing continents and oceans, it maps the stars, constellations, and imaginary coordinate lines that astronomers use to understand the night sky. The engraved markings may represent the celestial equator, the ecliptic, and constellation boundaries, turning the sphere into a miniature chart of the heavens. Celestial globes have a long history that reaches back to ancient Greek astronomy. By the Renaissance, they had become important teaching tools in Europe. Scholars, navigators, and wealthy collectors used them to study the stars and display scientific knowledge. Many were beautifully engraved and mounted on stands, so they served both as practical instruments and decorative objects. I saw a Coast Guard officer place his handgun into this angled metal tube while preparing to board a boat. What is this tube used for? What you saw is a bullet containment tube, also called a clearing barrel or clearing station. It is used by Coast Guard, military, and law enforcement personnel when a firearm needs to be checked in a safe direction before going on duty, entering a secure area, or boarding a boat. The officer points the muzzle into the tube so that if the gun accidentally fires during the check, the bullet is captured inside. These tubes are made from reinforced steel or ballistic material. Inside, they usually contain sand, rubber, or another material that can stop a bullet safely. You can see them at bases, docks, armories, and secure facilities where weapons are checked before personnel board boats or enter controlled areas. I found this small black plastic device in the basement, sitting in the utility sink next to the washing machine. It is about the size of my palm, was full of water, and still had a light blinking red and sometimes green. It has an open lock symbol on it, but I couldn't find any company name or serial number. What you found is an EASAT004, a reusable anti-theft security tag used in retail stores. The cable looped around a product, and the black unit locked shut with a magnetic mechanism. This made it useful for items that were difficult to protect with a flat sticker or a standard plastic security tag. If someone cut the cable, tried to open the unit, or walked through the store's security gates without having it removed, the tag could trigger a loud alarm. The red and green light is a status indicator, and the small internal battery was still powering it even after it got wet. I found this laminated card in my great-uncle's wallet, tucked behind his driver's license. He served in the Signal Corps during World War II and was in both Africa and Europe. The back says Belgium 1945, and the front has a strange geometric design. Does anyone know if this was some kind of military access card, identification card, or souvenir? What you found is a personal keepsake with anamorphic writing. The strange geometric design on the front is actually distorted text, made so it becomes readable only when the card is viewed from a very low angle. This technique is called perspective anamorphism. A similar idea is used on road markings like stop or bus, which are stretched out so they look normal to a driver approaching them. According to the person who was able to read the hidden text, the message says, Marjorie Richard Kirby Lejeune. The original poster later confirmed that these were the names of his great-aunt and great-uncle. The note, Belgium 1945, suggests it was made near the end of World War II, probably as a small personal souvenir. Since he kept it behind his driver's license for decades, it feels less like an official card and more like a private wartime memory. I found this steel-handled tool while cleaning out a house in Germany. It has a long, flexible spring section, and the bottom is marked SIPO, although the rest of the lettering is worn away. Does anyone know what it was used for? What you found is a German collapsible steel baton known as a Stahlroot Blitz, specifically model number 8323. This was a police weapon from Germany, associated with the 1930s and 1940s. It was linked to SIPO officers, including Gestapo personnel, during the World War II era. The design had a steel handle and two spring steel sections that could extend with a sharp flick of the wrist. A weighted steel tip made it far more dangerous than an ordinary wooden nightstick. Many original examples had a blackened metal finish, a short leather wrist strap, and markings such as SIPO and DRGM, which indicated a registered German Reich design. Compared with the solid wooden batons used by British and American police at the time, this was a compact and dangerous weapon. It was also an early predecessor of the modern collapsible police baton. I found this strange object that looks like a small bedside lamp. When I pull the chain, the lampshade slides down and reveals a hidden compartment inside. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a cigarette dispenser disguised as a miniature table lamp. It was probably made around the 1950s when smoking accessories were a familiar sight in living rooms, offices, and home bars. Cigarettes were loaded inside, and when the chain was pulled, the shade dropped down, making the cigarettes fan out from underneath. At that time, offering a cigarette to a guest was considered a polite gesture. Some people kept them in silver cases, while others liked playful dispensers like this one. The whole appeal was in the surprise. It looked like a small decorative lamp, and then, with one pull, it turned into a clever little serving piece. I found this carved wooden object at my friend's house. It has a woven-looking handle and a broad diamond-shaped end that looks a bit like a small paddle. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a traditional war club called a soupy from Malaita Island in the Solomon Islands. Its most recognizable feature is the broad head shaped like a diamond, which made it effective as a close combat weapon. These clubs were carved from very hard tropical wood, giving them enough weight and strength for real use in fighting. Over time, the soupy also became a ceremonial and status object. The handle was commonly wrapped with coconut fiber to improve the grip, while finer examples could be decorated with shell inlay or carved details. Some were made with stylized crocodile faces, a powerful symbol in Solomon Islands culture. On decorated pieces, those details could show that the club belonged to a chief or a person of high rank. I found this pair of small brass items at a flea market stand that was selling jewelry. Each one has a tiny loop at the end and spring-loaded spikes that slide in and out. Does anyone know what they were used for? What you found is a pair of rare Victorian anti-theft pocket watch fobs from the late 19th century. They were made to protect pocket watches when they were carried on chains in a vest or waistcoat pocket. The acorn-shaped bodies were decorative, but they also hid a clever spring-loaded mechanism. If someone tried to snatch the watch by pulling the chain, the sudden tension would make the small spikes spring outward. Those spikes would catch in the pocket fabric, making it much harder to pull the watch free. It is a clever little security device from a time when a pocket watch was expensive, visible, and tempting to thieves. I ordered 2 surplus gas mask filters, and these small glass bottles came with them, each stored inside a metal tube. Does anyone know what they were used for? What you received is a DP70M chemical dosimeter ampule, kept inside its protective metal case. It was a Cold War-era radiation measuring ampule used with the PK56 colorimeter. This type of equipment appeared in the Soviet bloc in the 1950s and was used by armies such as the Polish People's Army for field radiation control. Inside the small glass ampule is a special chemical liquid that changes color when exposed to radiation. The solution contained ammonium nitrate and a chemical called grease reagent, which produced a visible color reaction. The stronger the color became, the higher the absorbed dose. In a nuclear or radioactive contamination scenario, a soldier would carry the sealed ampule in its metal tube, then compare the liquid's color with a reference scale on the PK56 colorimeter. Some surplus sets were still stored or issued decades later, including examples dated to the 1980s. I found this pliers-like tool in the estate of a machinist. It is about 16 inches long, has interlocking metal fingers at the end, and is marked 1/2. Does anyone know what it was used for? What you found is a strapping crimper, a tool used with plastic packing straps, especially polypropylene ones. It was used in shipping, warehousing, and manufacturing to secure heavy boxes, pallets, and bundled materials. The strap was wrapped tightly around the load, and a small metal clip was placed over the overlapping ends. When the handles were squeezed, the jaws of the tool pressed the clip tightly onto the strap, locking everything in place. The 1/2 marking refers to the strap size, meaning this tool was made for 1/2-inch wide strapping. Tools like this became widely used in the second half of the 20th century, as plastic strapping became a practical alternative to rope and steel banding for many packaging jobs. I found this small clip-like object in my office. It has a textured black plastic piece and a metal hook attached to it. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a chin rest from a violin or viola. It is the shaped piece that helps the player hold the instrument comfortably under the chin while playing. The black curved part is where the jaw rests, and the metal bracket clamps it to the edge of the violin or viola. Chin rests became common in the 19th century, and are usually credited to the German violinist Louis Spohr, who introduced an early version in the 1820s. Before that, players held the violin directly against the body. The chin rest gave musicians more stability and made faster, more demanding playing easier. These parts can be made from ebony, rosewood, boxwood, or plastic. I found this metal contraption bolted to a length of wood in a barn on a farm. It has a spring, a lever, and what looks like a joint that can be tightened or loosened. Does anyone know what it was used for? What you found is part of an old sickle bar mower, specifically the Pitman arm assembly. This piece connected the drive system to the cutting bar. When the flywheel turned, the Pitman changed that rotation into a rapid back-and-forth stroke, which moved the triangular blades along the sickle bar to cut hay or tall grass. This type of mechanism was widely used on farm mowers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, including machines made by McCormick Deering and International Harvester. The wooden section helped absorb shock and vibration, while the metal straps, spring, and latch kept the assembly together during rough field work. I recently acquired this unusual antique instrument in a wooden case lined with red fabric. It has a metal handle, a long mechanical section with small teeth or chain-like part, and several separate attachments inside the case. Does anyone know what it was used for? What you acquired is an antique surgical chain osteotomy, an early bone-cutting instrument, and one of the ancestors of the modern chainsaw. The small-toothed chain moved around the metal guide as the handle was turned by hand, allowing a surgeon to cut bone with more control than an ordinary saw. In the late 18th century, Scottish physicians John Aitken and James Jeffrey developed a similar device for difficult childbirth procedures. It was used in symphysiotomy, where the joint at the front of the pelvis was divided to help deliver a baby. In 1830, German physician Bernhard Heine refined this idea into the osteotome, a more advanced hand-operated chainsaw for surgery. The wooden case held the handle, guide, and extra attachments together, which is why the set looks so carefully organized. My dad found this strange cast iron device at an estate sale and bought it for $10 without knowing what it was. It has a hand crank, several gears, and what looks like a small grinding wheel set at an angle. Does anyone know what it was used for? What your dad bought is a hand-cranked sharpener for sickle and scythe blades. It was made in the early 20th century by International Harvester under the McCormick Deering name, a brand closely associated with farm machinery and agricultural tools. The crank turned the gears, which spun the small grinding wheel. The sickle or scythe blade was guided across the stone at a fixed angle, helping the user keep a clean, even cutting edge. A dull blade made harvesting hay or cutting weeds slower and much harder, so a portable sharpener like this let workers touch up their tools without leaving the job. My mom found this small gold-colored pin near her pool gate. It has a flower-shaped top, and the little ball on the stem slides up and down, letting the piece open slightly. Does anyone know what it is? What your mom found is a decorative cigarette holder, likely part of a cigarette ring holder. The flower-shaped top opens so a cigarette can be placed inside, and the sliding bead moves upward to clamp it in place. Complete versions usually had a ring at the bottom so the holder could be worn on a finger. Accessories like this were popular in the early 20th century, when smoking was also tied to fashion and social presentation. This design kept the cigarette off the fingers, reduced contact with ash and heat, and made a smoking accessory look more like jewelry. I found this heavy metal tool while cleaning out an old house. It is stamped C.S. Osborne U.S. and marked 5/8. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a 5/8-inch wad punch, also called an arch punch, made by C.S. Osborne and Company. This company has been known for leatherworking and industrial hand tools since the early 19th century. The tool was made to punch clean, round holes through tough materials such as leather, rubber, and gasket stock. To use it, the worker placed the sharp circular edge against the material, then struck the flat top with a hammer or mallet. The cutting edge sliced out a small round disc, called a wad, and the cutout piece was pushed up into the hollow tube. Tools like this were used by leatherworkers, saddle makers, plumbers, mechanics, and gasket makers. The name wad punch also connects to older firearms, where similar punches were used to cut felt or cardboard wads for muzzle-loading guns. I found this small metal case while refinishing the attic of my 1905 house. Inside are tiny glass tubes and a metal piece stamped Johnson & Johnson. It looks like some kind of old medical or first aid item, but I can't tell what it was used for. What you found is an early 20th century Johnson & Johnson pocket hypodermic syringe set. It was a compact kit for carrying a reusable syringe and small glass tubes of medicine. A person could keep it in a pocket or travel bag, which made it useful for doctors, nurses, or patients who needed injections away from home. The striking part is the period it comes from. Around 1900, injectable drugs such as morphine were part of ordinary medical practice, and heroin was introduced by Bayer in 1898 as a medical product before its dangers were fully understood. The Johnson & Johnson marking fits that era, since the company was already known for sterile supplies and first aid products. I found this small porcelain piece while cleaning out a drawer at my in-laws' house. It has a decorative base, a tall center column, and several holes on top. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a porcelain hat pin holder. The holes on top were made for long hat pins, which were stored upright so they would not get lost or damage the surface underneath. Pieces like this were part of a vanity set, placed alongside combs, brushes, perfume bottles, and other personal items. Hat pin holders became popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when women's hats grew large and needed to be fastened securely to the hair. A hat pin could be around 8 inches long, with a sharp point on one end and a decorative head on the other. The holder kept these sharp pins organized while also displaying their ornamental tops. I noticed this large cone-shaped object near the brass section at my local symphony. It sat on the floor for most of the performance. Does anyone know what it is? What you saw is a tuba mute, a large cone-shaped device used to change the sound of a tuba. It fits into the bell of the instrument, much like smaller mutes used for trumpets or trombones. Once it is in place, it changes the tone by making the sound softer, more focused, or more restrained, depending on the material and shape of the mute. Tuba mutes are used in orchestral music when the composer wants a special sound from the instrument. They can be made from aluminum, fiber, or wood. Because they are so large and awkward to move, the player usually keeps the mute close by and only places it in the tuba for the exact passages where the music calls for it. I came across this polished metal piece in a drawer. It has the Hermes name on it, a curved hook at one end, and a flat, narrow tip. It looks like it might be an accessory tool, possibly for ties or clothing. What you found is a hoof pick, a tool used to clean a horse's hooves. The curved metal end is made for scraping out mud, small stones, and packed debris from the underside of the hoof. One important area is the frog, the softer V-shaped part in the center of the hoof, where dirt and stones can get trapped and cause discomfort or infection. Hoof cleaning tools have been used for centuries wherever horses were part of daily life, from cavalry work to farming and riding. By the 19th century, hoof picks were a basic part of grooming kits and military riding equipment. The Hermes marking also makes sense because Hermes began in Paris in 1837 as a maker of fine harnesses and riding gear long before it became known as a luxury fashion house. I found this very heavy rusted metal tool lying in a bush next to my driveway. It has a long handle, a wide T-shaped head with a pointed end on one side and a curved hook on the other. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a water meter key, also known as a curb key. It is a long tool used to turn the main water supply valve on or off, usually inside an underground meter box near the street or sidewalk. Utility workers, plumbers, and homeowners use tools like this when water needs to be shut off for repairs, leaks, or emergencies. The hollow fitting at the lower end slips over the valve stem inside the meter box, and the long shaft lets the user turn it without reaching into the box by hand. The T-shaped head provides leverage, while the pointed and hooked ends can help lift or shift a meter box lid. Tools like this became common as municipal water systems expanded in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. I found this wired black device inside my car. It has a Spiron label, barcodes, and an IMEI number on it. I'm worried it might be some kind of tracking device. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a Spirion GPS tracker. It is a vehicle tracking device that uses GPS and a cellular connection to report a car's location. Devices like this are commonly installed by dealerships, lenders, rental companies, and fleet operators so they can see where a vehicle is, recover it if it is stolen, or repossess it if payments stop. The IMEI number on the label shows that it connects to a mobile network, similar to a cell phone. So yes, it is a tracker, but that does not automatically mean someone secretly planted it there. If the car was recently bought from a dealer or used commercially before, the unit may have simply been left in place. I found this large metal object in my great-grandparents' storage unit. They had a farm for many years with cows and crops, and this piece looks homemade or repurposed from an old can. It has a handle, cone-shaped ends, and hundreds of tiny punched holes across the surface. What you found is a homemade metal scraper percussion instrument, similar to a Dominican guira. It appears to have been made from an old tomato can, with hundreds of punched holes creating a rough raised surface. When a player drags a stick or metal rod across it, those raised bumps produce a sharp, rattling rhythm. Instruments like this are used in Caribbean and Latin American music, especially merengue, salsa, and Cuban sun music. Traditional guiros were made from hollow gourds, but metal versions became popular because they are louder, brighter, and more durable. This piece is interesting because it shows a simple homemade version of the same idea, made from an ordinary food can. I found this small, silver-colored object with a decorative handle and an oval opening at the end. It looks like it may have been used as a small household or clothing tool. What you found is the handle from a vintage children's toothbrush, and it appears to be made of sterling silver. The oval opening at the end held a replaceable brush head. When the bristles wore out, the owner did not throw away the whole toothbrush. They simply replaced the brush head and kept using the decorative metal handle. Silver-handled toothbrushes were popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially in wealthier households. They were made to match dressing table sets and personal toiletry items. That is why this piece looks more like jewelry or a small vanity tool than part of a toothbrush. I recently bought a house in eastern Canada and found this hidden in the front bushes. It has a long metal handle and a round head covered with screws, almost like a homemade mace. Does anyone know what it was used for? What you found is most likely a homemade garden ornament. It was probably made to imitate an allium flower, the round, ornamental flower that grows on a tall stem. The wooden ball forms the flower head, the screws create the spiky texture, and the metal rod acts as the stem. It may look unsettling when found hidden in the bushes, especially because it resembles a homemade mace up close. But in a flower bed, this would have blended in as rustic yard art. My wife found this heavy metal object under the front seat of our car. It is about 6 inches long, weighs around 1 pound, and has a smooth spinning section that feels like it may have a bearing inside. There are no markings on it, and we have no idea how it ended up in the car. What your wife found is a banner spindle, a rotating metal part used in a banner or flag display stand. The threaded end screws into the display hardware, while the smooth spinning section lets the banner turn or swing slightly instead of staying fixed in one position. That smooth movement is why it feels like there may be a bearing inside. Parts like this are used with advertising banners, festival signs, storefront displays, and temporary event setups. It most likely came from some kind of portable display equipment that was once transported in the car. I found this metal tool in a friend's kitchen. It has a long, thin handle, a cup-shaped metal end, and a round ball that slides up and down the rod. We could not figure out what it was meant to do. What you found is a German egg topper, a small kitchen tool used to open a boiled egg neatly at the top. In German, this tool has a famously long name that roughly means a device that creates a predetermined breaking point in an eggshell.
This is it. This is how you use the Eierschalen-Sollbrechstellen Verursacher.
It is especially useful for soft-boiled eggs served in the shell. Instead of cracking the egg with a spoon and leaving jagged edges, this tool makes a clean circular break. To use it, you place the cup-shaped end over the top of the egg, lift the sliding metal ball, and let it drop. The ball strikes the tool and sends a quick shock through the metal cup. That shock cracks the eggshell in a neat ring, so the top can be lifted off cleanly. I found this wooden and metal object with a long handle and a rotating section above it. The upper part has several metal rods, decorative wooden ends, and it spins freely when turned. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a kite spindle, also called a kite reel or kite winder. It is a handheld tool for controlling the line of a kite. The handle stays in the user's hand, while the open frame above it rotates. As the kite climbs, the line unwinds smoothly. When the kite is brought back down, the same frame helps wind the line back onto the spindle instead of letting it tangle. Kites have a much older history than most people expect. The earliest known examples are associated with ancient China more than 2,000 years ago, where they were used for signaling, measuring distance, testing wind, and military observation. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, kites became popular in Europe and America for recreation, scientific experiments, and early aerial photography. I saw this large matte black object being hauled on a flatbed truck with a police escort. It looks like a long, almost featureless rectangular structure with rounded edges, and I could not tell whether it was part of a vehicle, a building, or some kind of industrial equipment. What you saw is a prefabricated wastewater treatment tank, basically a compact sewage treatment system contained in one large tank. It is used in places where there is no easy connection to a city sewer line, such as rural properties, construction sites, schools, industrial areas, or remote facilities. On the road, it can look like some kind of secret military equipment, mostly because it is huge, smooth, and matte black. The police escort is there because the load is oversized. Inside, it works like a small treatment plant. Wastewater enters the tank, heavier solids settle out, and helpful bacteria break down the organic waste. Some systems then add extra settling or disinfection before the treated water is discharged according to local regulations. Packaged sewage treatment plants became more common in the mid-20th century, when smaller ready-made systems became useful for places that could not build a full treatment plant. Modern versions use small plastic pieces inside the tank, giving bacteria more surface area to grow and clean the water efficiently. I found this old heavy tool and it appears to be made from wood and iron. It is about 15 inches long with a rounded metal weight on one end and a curved metal tip on the other. Does anyone know what it was used for? What you found is a turpentine hack, a heavy hand tool once used in the American South to collect resin from pine trees. It was especially associated with longleaf pine forests in Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas. Workers used the curved iron blade to cut shallow V-shaped marks into the bark. The rounded metal end added weight, helping the blade bite into the tree with less effort. The pattern of cuts left on the trunk was called a cat face. Resin slowly flowed down these cuts into a small cup, or wooden box attached to the tree. The collected resin was then distilled into turpentine oil and rosin. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, this was a major industry in the southeastern United States. These products were known as naval stores because pine tar, pitch, turpentine, and rosin were once vital for maintaining wooden ships, ropes, and sails. My grandpa gave me this small metal chest, and it looks like some kind of coin bank. There is no obvious lock or clear way to open it, but it has a sliding piece on the side with a round opening. What your grandpa gave you is a vintage treasure chest mystery bank, a small mechanical coin bank made to look like an old pirate chest. These novelty banks were produced in the United States during the mid-20th century and were made to turn saving coins into a small puzzle. At first glance, it looks like a sealed metal box with no key and no obvious lock, but that is exactly the point. To open it, a coin first has to be dropped into the slot on top. That step helps activate the internal release. Then the bank is turned on its side and a paperclip or another thin tool is pushed into the small hole on the bottom. This releases a hidden locking pin, allowing the sliding side section to pull out. Once that part is removed, the chest can be turned upside down and gently shaken to empty the coins. Banks like this were part of a long American tradition of mechanical and puzzle banks, designed not just to store money, but to make saving it feel like a trick. I saw this green device at a flea market, and it almost looks like a roulette wheel. It has the S and H green stamps logo in the center, dollar amounts around the outside, and rows of round slots that look like they could hold small balls or tokens. What you saw at the flea market is an S and H green stamps dispenser, a store machine that gave customers bonus stamps at checkout. The cashier set the dollar amount on the dial and the machine dispensed the matching number of stamps. Shoppers pasted those stamps into special booklets, and when they had enough filled booklets, they could trade them for household items, toys, kitchenware, and other merchandise. S and H green stamps were introduced by the Sperry and Hutchinson Company in 1896 and became a major part of American shopping culture in the mid-20th century. Supermarkets, gas stations, and department stores used them to reward customer loyalty. For many families, saving these little green stamps was part of the weekly shopping routine, almost like collecting points long before modern reward cards. I found this tall, narrow structure at my local community park. It is about 15 feet high, sits on a small concrete base, and I could not see any obvious openings from the outside. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a chimney swift tower, a man-made structure built to give chimney swifts a safe place to nest and shelter. The entrance is near the top, which is why the tower can look sealed from the sides. The birds fly in from above and cling to the rough interior walls. They do not perch on branches the way many backyard birds do. Their feet are adapted for gripping vertical surfaces. Chimney swifts once nested in dead trees, then adapted to chimneys in towns and cities. Today, parks and conservation groups build towers like this to replace that lost habitat. The birds are also valuable in parks and neighborhoods because they feed on flying insects, including mosquitoes and flies. I found this in an old office building in New York City. It is made of wood and what looks like cast iron, and it stands about 5 feet tall. The bottom has small wheels and a metal plate that looks like it could slide under something heavy. What you found is a Johnson bar, also called a pry truck or J-bar. It is a tool for moving extremely heavy objects, such as safes, machinery, printing presses, file cabinets, and large crates. The flat metal lip slides under the edge of the load, and the long wooden handle gives the user strong leverage. When the handle is pulled back, one side of the object rises slightly onto the small wheels, making it possible to turn it, reposition it, or move it a short distance with much less effort. Tools like this became common in warehouses, factories, print shops, and office buildings by the mid-20th century. The name Johnson bar has older roots in railroads and buses, where it referred to large hand levers used for brakes, gears, or other controls. Over time, the same name became attached to this simple but powerful lifting tool. I found this wooden-handled tool in the home of a 102-year-old antique collector. It has a heavy metal end, shaped almost like a small shoe with a curved edge and a ridged surface underneath. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a glazing iron, a hand tool used in leatherworking and shoemaking to finish leather edges. The metal head was heated, then rubbed over leather after wax or polish had been applied. This sealed the surface and gave it a smooth, clean shine, especially on soles, heels, and thick leather edges. Tools like this were common in shoemakers' workshops during the 19th and early 20th centuries, when shoes and leather goods were still finished largely by hand. The beaked shape helped the worker reach curved areas around the sole or heel, while the ridged underside smoothed and compressed the leather. I saw this vessel off the coast of Long Island, New York. It has 3 very tall vertical columns that look almost like smokestacks, but I could not tell what they were for. Does anyone know what this vessel is? What you saw is a spud barge, a work barge used for construction and maintenance on the water. The tall black columns are not smokestacks. They are called spuds, which are long steel legs that lower into the seabed. Once lowered, they pin the barge in place so it does not drift with the wind, waves, or current while crews work. This type of barge is used for bridge construction, dock repair, dredging, shoreline protection, and surveying. Its purpose is to give workers a stable platform without building a temporary structure in the water. Around Long Island and New York Harbor, these barges are regularly used because piers, bridges, seawalls, and underwater utilities constantly need inspection, repair, or construction. I found this rusty metal device in an abandoned building. It looks like it was once painted red, and it has what appears to be a fuel tank on the bottom with a burner or heating section above it. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a small portable tinsmith stove. It was made to heat heavy copper soldering irons before electric soldering irons and bottled gas torches became common. A tinsmith filled the lower tank with gasoline or kerosene, lit the burner, and placed the soldering iron in the heating area on top. Once the iron was hot enough, it could melt solder and join thin sheets of metal. Stoves like this were useful in tinsmith shops, farm repairs, and on-site metalwork during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They helped make and repair gutters, lanterns, metal cans, roofing parts, and other sheet metal items. For its time, it was a practical way to do soldering work almost anywhere. I found this heavy steel tool in a toolbox. It is about 4 feet long, weighs around 10 pounds, and has a red shaft with a large sliding cylindrical weight near the top. There is also a side handle with a rubber grip, a threaded end, and a removable magnetic metal tip. The label appears to say Tailor Tools. Does anyone know what this tool was used for? What you found is a concrete nail driver, a heavy hand tool used to drive hardened pins or nails into concrete and masonry. It works like a controlled slide hammer. The magnetic tip holds the fastener in place while the long body keeps the tool aligned. The sliding weight is lifted and then driven downward, sending a sharp impact through the shaft and into the nail. Tools like this were useful on construction sites before powder-actuated nail guns became common. They allowed workers to fasten wood strips, brackets, fixtures, or small metal parts to concrete without electricity, compressed air, or cartridges. For a builder, it was a rugged and portable way to make solid attachments in hard surfaces using only hand force. We found this metal tool in our kitchen, but we are not sure what it is used for. It has a handle and several curved metal blades stretched across the front. Does anyone know what this kitchen tool is? What you found in your kitchen is a pastry blender, also called a pastry cutter. It is used to mix cold butter, shortening, or lard into flour when making pie crust, American biscuits, scones, and similar baked goods. The curved metal wires press down through the mixture and break the fat into small pieces while keeping it cold. This step is important because the small pieces of fat create the flaky texture. As the dough bakes, the fat melts and leaves tiny pockets inside the crust. That is what makes pastry light, tender, and layered. Tools like this were common in home kitchens before electric mixers and food processors. I found this unusual pair of pliers on an old farm. The jaws have a square opening, a small post, and a round insert near the tip that looks like it may be made from a different metal. Does anyone know what they were used for? What you found is a pair of old farrier's stamping pliers used when making or repairing iron horseshoes. A farrier would heat the shoe in a forge, place the hot metal between the jaws, and use the tool to press or form the openings for the horseshoe nails. The round insert near the tip was made from a tougher metal because that part took the most wear. Tools like this were common on farms and in blacksmith shops, when horses were essential for plowing fields, pulling wagons, riding, and everyday transportation. Before factory-made horseshoes became widely available, many shoes were finished by hand. Making clean, even nail openings mattered because the nails had to hold the shoe firmly while avoiding the sensitive inner part of the hoof. My dad found this small metal object in an old toolbox, and we cannot figure out what it was used for. It comes apart into several pieces, and one side has what looks like cotton inside, possibly a wick. The other side has a small curved tube attached to it. What your dad found is an antique liquid fuel burner, most likely a small soldering heater. It was used before electric soldering irons and modern gas torches became common. The cotton inside worked as a wick, soaking up alcohol, kerosene, or a similar light fuel. The curved tube acted as the burner outlet, allowing the flame to be directed where heat was needed. Tools like this were used in workshops during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially for soldering and light metal repair. A worker could heat a soldering iron, soften solder, or warm a small metal joint without electricity or bottled gas. It was a compact, practical heat source for toolboxes, repair benches, and small jobs. I saw this wooden object at a Goodwill and could not figure out what it was. It folds like a small stand, with curved wooden pieces on top, side handles, and metal braces near the legs. What you saw at Goodwill is a vintage camel saddle stool, also called a camel pack seat. It is a decorative seat based on the shape of traditional camel saddles. The curved wooden pieces form the sitting surface, while the sidebars and footrests copy the structure of real riding or pack saddles. Pieces like this became popular as decorative furniture in the mid-20th century, especially around the 1960s. Many were made from polished hardwood, leather, brass tacks, and metal fittings. Traditional camel saddles have been used for centuries across North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, where camels carried riders and cargo across desert routes. I found this unusual hand tool in an old wooden shack. It has a textured handle and a small metal blade shaped like a teardrop, with M and S Sheffield stamped near the base. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a 19th century ink scraper, a small tool once used to correct mistakes in handwritten documents. Before people could easily correct ink, a clerk, teacher, or bookkeeper could use a sharp scraper like this to remove a written error from the page. The short blade, shaped like a teardrop, was designed to shave away dried ink, along with the very top layer of paper fibers it had soaked into. If done carefully, the sheet was not cut through, and the scraped area could be smoothed and written over again. The marking M and S Sheffield points to Sheffield, England, a city famous for cutlery and toolmaking. It may refer to Maxfield and Sons, a Sheffield firm active in the late 19th century when tools like this were sold through stationery and office supply catalogs. I found this unusual object at a yard sale in Germany. It has a green glass base with a metal top and a long metal nozzle attached to it. Does anyone know what it is? What you found at the yard sale is a vacuum cleaner sprayer attachment. The glass jar held cleaning liquid, and the metal nozzle connected to the vacuum's exhaust or blower port. When air passed through the nozzle, it drew liquid from the jar and sprayed it out as a fine mist. Attachments like this were used with older canister vacuums that could blow air as well as suction it in. They were mainly used for applying carpet shampoo or upholstery cleaner to fabric surfaces. I found this old set of metal instruments in a fitted case, and they look like they might be medical or surgical tools. The case has several different blades, hooks, handles, and small attachments. Does anyone know what kind of kit this is? What you found appears to be an antique trepanning set, also known as a trephination surgical set. These instruments were used to remove a small circular section of the skull, usually after serious head injuries or when pressure inside the head had to be relieved. The ring-shaped cutting tools in the case are called trephines. A surgeon would rotate a trephine carefully against the skull to create a controlled opening, while the hooks, blades, and probes helped lift, guide, or clear small parts during the operation. Trepanning is one of the oldest known surgical practices, with archaeological evidence going back thousands of years. Sets like this, with fitted cases and interchangeable instruments, were used in 19th century surgery long before modern brain imaging, antibiotics, and modern neurosurgery. I found these blue, translucent, jelly-like things washed up on the beach with what looked like thin, trailing strings or tentacles around them. Does anyone know what they are? What you found on the beach is a Portuguese man-o'-war, also known as a blue bottle. It may look like a jellyfish, but it is actually a siphonophore. That means it is not one simple animal, but a colony of specialized parts called zooids, all working together as one organism. The blue float is filled with gas and stays on the surface of the water, where it catches the wind like a small sail. Beneath it hang long, venomous tentacles used to catch small fish and crustaceans. Those tentacles can reach up to 100 feet, and they can still sting even after washing ashore, so they should not be touched. Portuguese men-o'-war drift through the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, carried by wind and currents. Their name comes from the float, which reminded sailors of a Portuguese warship under sail. I keep seeing this strange object sticking out of the water near a creek where I live. It looks like part of an old vessel or some kind of machinery, and it has been sitting there partially submerged for years. What you saw sticking out of the water is part of Quester 1, a hand-built submarine created in the 1960s by Jerry Bianco, a Brooklyn shipyard worker. Bianco wanted to raise the wreck of the Italian luxury liner Andrea Doria, which sank in July 1956 after colliding with the Swedish liner Stockholm off Nantucket. He built Quester 1 on the banks of Coney Island Creek, using salvage steel and money raised by selling $1 shares in his company, Deep Sea Techniques. The submarine was about 45 feet long and weighed more than 80 tons. Reports said Navy engineers considered it safe for depths of about 600 feet, enough to reach the Andrea Doria. Bianco planned to attach inflatable lift bags to the wreck and bring it back to the surface. But during a public launch in 1970, the submarine was lowered too soon. Because ballast had been removed from one side, it tipped over and became stuck in the mud. Bianco later managed to get it upright again, but investors lost confidence, and Quester 1 never reached the wreck. I found this unusual tool while cleaning out my father's workshop. It has a green plastic handle and two metal wheels at the end with gear-like ridges. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a frame wire crimper, a beekeeping tool used to tighten the support wires inside wooden hive frames. In each frame, thin wire holds the wax foundation, the flat sheet that guides bees as they build straight comb. If the wire is loose, the wax can sag or tear from heat and the weight of bees and honey. To use the tool, a beekeeper runs the two ridged metal wheels along the wire. The wheels press tiny zigzag bends into the wire, which slightly shortens it and increases the tension. Tools like this became useful after movable frame beekeeping spread in the 19th century. In the United States, the Langstroth movable frame hive was patented in 1852, and tools like this helped beekeepers build stronger frames and maintain their hives more easily. We saw this old photograph on a table at a restaurant and spent a while trying to figure out what kind of machine it shows. It appears to be some kind of large industrial mill with big circular stones. Does anyone know what this machine was used for? What you saw in that photograph is a traditional olive oil mill and press. The large circular stones were used to crush olives into a thick paste. After that, the paste was placed on woven mats or in pressing baskets, stacked under a press, and squeezed to release the oil. Machines like this were still used in Mediterranean olive mills during the 19th and early 20th centuries, although the basic method is thousands of years old. Olive oil was not just a cooking ingredient. It was used in lamps, medicine, cosmetics, religious rituals, and trade. I found this small gold-colored metal accessory on my boyfriend's desk. It is about 2 inches long with round decorative ends, small looped clips on both sides, and a sliding piece in the center. Does anyone know what it is? What you found is a collar bar, a classic men's accessory worn with a dress shirt and tie. It connects the two collar points and gently lifts the tie knot, giving the collar a cleaner and more elegant shape. The small clips on each side attach directly to the collar, so this version does not require special holes in the shirt. Collar bars became especially fashionable in the 1920s and 1930s, when sharp collars, tailored suits, and carefully tied neckties were an important part of men's style. They are still worn today by people who like traditional menswear and a refined vintage look. A friend of mine bought this set in France and was told it may be from the 18th or 19th century. Each piece has a wooden handle and a brass-colored metal end with a curved, pointed shape. We even took it to an antique dealer, but they could not identify it. What your friend bought is a set of clonks, traditional European fishing tools used for catching whales catfish. A clonk is used from a boat by striking its curved end against the surface of the water. This creates a deep popping sound, similar to a cork being pulled from a bottle. Underwater, that sound can attract catfish from below and bring them closer to the bait. Clonks have been used for generations on European rivers where large whales catfish live. Older examples were usually carved from wood, while later versions could include metal or plastic parts. The shape and size of the striking end affect the sound, which explains why a set like this might include several slightly different pieces. I found this small black metal cube while cleaning out junk drawers on a 100-foot boat. It has square openings on the top and sides, several small round posts around the edges, and faint lettering that looks like it might relate to night use or calibration. What you found is a brake caliper piston cube tool used with a standard 3/8-inch drive ratchet. It is an automotive repair tool used when replacing rear disc brake pads. On many vehicles, the rear caliper piston cannot simply be pushed straight back. Because the parking brake is built into the rear caliper, the piston has to be pressed and turned at the same time. Each side of the cube has different small posts or slots that fit different piston designs. A mechanic chooses the matching side, attaches a ratchet, and winds the piston back into the caliper. Tools like this became common as rear disc brakes with built-in parking brakes spread through passenger cars in the late 20th century. I found this old Craftsman specialty tool and I cannot figure out what it was made for. It is made of metal, has a spring-loaded handle, and when I turn the knob, the two unusual shaped ends open and spread apart. What you found is a valve spring compressor, a specialty tool used for servicing flathead or side valve engines. A very similar design was patented in the United States by Harry W. Culp in 1950 as a valve spring compressor. In these older engines, the valves are mounted beside the cylinders, which makes the springs hard to reach and nearly impossible to compress safely by hand. The forked end of the tool fits around the valve spring and the cap that holds it in place. When the screw is tightened, the spring compresses, allowing the mechanic to remove the small valve keepers and take the spring or valve out for repair. Tools like this were common in garages during the first half of the 20th century, when flathead engines were used in cars, trucks, tractors, and military vehicles. This style is especially associated with World War II-era Willys MB and Ford GPW Jeeps, Dodge WC trucks, and similar older machines. I found this small metal attachment inside a 1919 Singer 66 treadle sewing machine. It is lightweight, fits in my hand, and has a slightly curved sharp end. The screw can be removed, but none of the parts seem to move even though it looks like they should. What you found is a vintage drawing compass, a small tool used for drawing circles and smooth curves. A pencil would clip into one side while the pointed metal leg rested on the paper as the pivot point. The arms could be opened to the needed width and locked in place, allowing the user to repeat the same curve or circle accurately. Since it was found inside a 1919 Singer 66 treadle sewing machine, it was probably kept there for pattern work. Dressmakers use tools like this to mark curved pattern lines, collars, cuffs, rounded corners, and repeated measurements before cutting fabric. In the early 20th century, tools like this were useful for anyone drafting or adjusting sewing patterns at home. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. I hope you found it interesting. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and lets more people discover the channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.